On this episode of On the Bridge, I'm chatting with Paul Shepherd, who's the chair of CHIRP. Morning, Paul.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us here in Holland.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, I want to start with you giving us an overview of what CHIRP is and what the objectives are of CHIRP.
Thank you. I mean, CHIRP is a confidential hazardous reporting program. It's been around for 40 years in aviation, 20 years in maritime more broadly. And about 3 years ago now, I met the director of the maritime side and I said, we need to have a super yacht specific version of this to speak to the community about what's happening in the community. And he said, go on then. And I didn't step back quickly enough, unfortunately. And so here we are, it's 3 years after that idea. It's been running for about 2 years now, and it's 8 publications in, and it's continuing to really help to engage the industry in this important conversation.
Brilliant. Okay, so in this industry, as you well know, confidentiality is key. So how does the program ensure that people can report instances but stay anonymous?
I think that is one of the most important points, because individuals need to have the confidence that they are going to not have any recriminations about what they report, right? And unfortunately, as much as we would like to hope that in the sector we would only want to learn from accidents and everybody would be very open, the reality is that unfortunately some people aren't. So crew need to have confidence that they can share what they're talking about. And I would actually just perhaps switch the emphasis there on this. It's not a whistleblowing program. It really is a learning and sharing program where people can, between themselves, the same conversation that you might have in the crew bar, the same conversation you might have over a WhatsApp group, we just have that conversation in a slightly more formal way with the added sort of comfort of having the confidentiality layer over the top. So in terms of how that works, CHIRP is a registered charity in the UK. So there is absolutely no commercial angle whatsoever. And there's a secretariat, and it's funded by various maritime bodies, but there really is a bit of a firewall there between any kind of interested parties and what happens within it.
Yeah.
There's a sort of a secretariat, and if somebody wants to report something, they can use the website, they can use the app, they can pick up the phone, they can send an email, whatever it is to the CHIRP, to the secretariat. And they treat from that point onwards these things with the absolute utmost confidentiality, to the point that I am the chair of this kind of the next step, which is this board of fellow yacht crew who review the accident and help to make some suggestions. And I hope to think that we're fairly trusted partners in that process, but these things are confidential to us as well.
Oh, right.
So even at that point where I am, the chair of this board, I don't even know the name of the boat, the name of the crew member, any identifying details whatsoever. And then if you look at the output that CHIRP produces with the publications that you guys have been very helpful sharing, if you actually read them, they are absolutely anonymized to the point where it doesn't say there was a 60-meter yacht at anchor off, Portofino, and there was a tender accident. There is a yacht, and this happened.
Yeah.
And that's really, we're aiming very much for the lesson, and we don't need to know, which boats it was on.
That's interesting. So because it's a charity and there's no commercial aspect, that I think probably would make people feel more comfortable to know that it's not a fishing expedition. It's very much actually an idea of increasing crew safety and allowing crew that feel uncomfortable in situations where they feel something isn't right or they see a dangerous situation. But it's not a case of whistleblowing and trying to get anyone in trouble, because of course they'd worry about their own job. So that's interesting that it's very much sort of charity, and also, like you say, you don't even know the actual finer details of it. So
I'm right in the middle of the organisation, and they won't tell me who reported it, which is great, because that also gives people confidence. Because it's also
which is the important thing, because I think actually reporting things probably is quite a brave thing, because there's probably a lot of practices that go on that just are deemed normal, which shouldn't be deemed normal. So to break that norm is a brave thing.
And I think we can use a slightly different word there. I know that the word reporting is literally in the acronym CHIRP, but I think let's think of it more as sharing. Right?
Yeah.
And I think rather than whistleblowing, it's very much a more positive kind of conversation, because this community of incredible professionals who are working all over the industry, all different types of boats, all over the world, there is a tangible desire to go, oof, that happened to me.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't want that to happen to my colleagues, to my friends. And on the flip side, there is a real desire to actually learn from our colleagues' experiences on different boats.
Yeah.
And all CHIRP really is just a forum, a focal point with that layer of confidentiality on top, where there is just that, it's a tool that same conversation that would happen in the crew bar, it just happens on a much broader scale. And hopefully we can have more industry-wide change rather than just that kind of smaller practice that we might have.
Because the conversation that happens in the crew bar being had in CHIRP hopefully means that other people will learn from it, which actually increases safety.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so what are the most reported incidents in super yacht operations, and have you seen any trends and patterns?
Right, so in the 2 years that we've been around, I don't know exactly how many reports this is based on, but we've had tender operations, anchoring and mooring operations, and working aloft as being the three biggest themes from the reports. And of course, there is a bit of a selection bias in there that's based on the data of what we get told,
of course,
rather than the industry in general. But I think that is probably quite reflective of the main issues that we see. And you were mentioning earlier on that you've heard stories from some of your friends and colleagues of actually those are the things which tend to come up, right?
Yeah, yeah. And often I think the horror stories that we hear are from more junior crew that don't know different. So they see more senior crew doing it. So why would they think it's a problem? But actually then when someone points it out, they realize how dangerous it is. But then it's difficult to be able to say to a senior member of crew, actually what you're doing, I don't feel comfortable with. So,
it's incredible.
And also what's really scary is some of the really horror stories we hear, it's often that it's deemed normal because no one's ever been injured or died from it. But it takes one person to be injured or died before everyone says, oh my God, that's really dangerous. So yeah, like you say, the importance of being able to report things, hopefully then in a wider way reaches more crew, for maybe crew that nothing bad has happened to them yet, but maybe that practice happens on board and they think, actually, I do feel uncomfortable with it, but everyone around me is deeming it as normal. But actually reading this, I see that it isn't normal. This is terrible thing has happened to someone, and perhaps then giving them the confidence to say, actually, I don't feel comfortable with this on board.
I think you should be the chair of CHIRP. You're doing a much better job of
too many jobs already.
But what you've described it in safety management kind of theory is called the normalisation of deviation.
Yes, I love that.
So there is good practice, there's bad practice, right?
Yeah.
And good practice has no consequences because everything goes really well. And bad practice has no consequences most of the time until something goes wrong. And until something goes wrong, that deviation from the best practice is normal.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's fine, because that's what you've
Always
seen someone
done.
doing. It's what everyone's always done. And there are those kind of elephants in the room in our industry where we could do a small step, but because it's normal to not take that step, we don't do it.
Yeah.
And I think one for me is kind of kill cords, for example.
Yeah.
In boats.
Goodness, such a simple thing.
Right, exactly. And that is something which is just so incredibly basic. And I think we are most of the way there with that. Maybe we're 3/4 of the way towards people going, yeah, of course we do. But it's the of course we do, which is the normalisation of good practice, right?
Yeah.
And obviously we wear kill cords, but there are people who obviously don't, which is why we end up with a tender literally on the pontoon in Monaco. Like, sort of, how did it get there? I don't know. Maybe somebody wasn't wearing a kill cord, right? And then I think, but that's a really good example, because then the next step would then be use of life jackets in tenders. And that's a really interesting one, because I'd probably say that among our yachting community, we're maybe at, maybe a third to maybe 50% on people thinking that's a good idea. But there's a lot of other people who would say, well, yes, but the guests don't like it, or it doesn't look good, or those kinds of things.
Yes, there's a challenge there outside of often the crew's control. If the owner or the guest is saying, we don't want to, they're faced with a bit of a challenge themselves then.
But let me be clear on that. I'm not suggesting that the guests should wear life jackets. I'm suggesting that the crew should wear life jackets.
Sure.
And I think in the same way, but this is kind of that normalisation bit there. If you say to somebody, do you wear kill cords in the boat? They'll go, yeah, obviously, of course we do. It'd be crazy to think that you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, do you wear life jackets? Oh, but, right. And it's that kind of, we're not quite at the point there where there were some people who go, yes, of course we do, obviously. Yeah. But there's some people where we're kind of still in that transition of trying to share that best practice.
Yeah.
And work aloft is another fantastic example of this, because we get photos sent into us, either, in more formal report form, or just literally just a snap of somebody who is standing on a slippery, sloping surface that is covered in soapy water, who is horribly exposed. And we're not talking about maybe could slip in a really dramatically crazy way.
Yeah.
We're talking about somebody who is standing on a slippery surface with nothing in between them and a 10-meter drop onto a concrete platform. And that's normal. And that's what we need to change. And I think your point you made earlier on is that actually we can do that conversation in the crew bar, but why don't we do that conversation across the entire industry? So that crew member goes, I read this thing, or I heard this thing, or someone told me about this thing. Well, that isn't normal.
Yeah.
And that's how we start to change it.
I just want to counter also what we're saying by saying that recently a lot of stories I've heard are by captains and chief officers who are doing exactly what we're talking about.
Yes.
I do feel that the conversation of safety, and I only obviously hear a very small part of it, but even conversations I've had here, I do feel that the generational shift of age of captains perhaps has something to do with it. I don't know. Or maybe people are just becoming more aware because maybe incidents are becoming more talked about. That definitely, I would say, friends who are captains, chief officers, or crew that we have, you know, very open relationships with, that they are trying very hard and they are trying to educate
Absolutely.
crew. And a lot of these bad practices that we're talking about, they are very against and wouldn't do. So along with horror stories, I also feel that there's a lot of great crew out there and great captains who lead by example. Conversations I was even having yesterday of a captain, you know, who's been asked by crew if they can do something that, you know, they want to do, jumping off the boat, whatever. And he really thought about it. And for him, it was a no. And he had a lot of disappointed crew. But ultimately, he realizes he is responsible for the lives of those people on board. So as much as he's got disappointed crew, he goes to bed at night knowing he's kept them safe. And those conversations, I feel, are as commonplace perhaps as the bad conversations at the moment. So I'm just putting it out there as a positive thing.
I'm very, very glad that you did, actually,
Yeah.
because I think it's very easy in this kind of conversation to just kind of wallow in the bad stuff. And we just spend our time moaning about how terrible everything is. And that is not the case at all.
No, there are some really great
Hugely. And there's some great
captains who
practice.
understand their responsibility and
Absolutely.
take it extremely seriously and put that above everything else. And ultimately, I think if I were a crew member, that is who I would want to work for.
And you learn from every single captain you work with. You learn who you want to be and you learn who you don't want to be.
Yeah.
And there are so many great examples. But I'd just like to highlight that, you know, I have a mixed yacht and commercial background. But they're not, this middle group, this board, this advisory board in the middle, this is very much not a merchant navy talking down to the yacht community thing. That board is full of a dozen and a half active yacht crew. Most of them on boats that are kind of, you know, a significant number on smaller vessels, some on larger vessels. We've got captains, we've got chief officers, we've got chief engineers, we've got people interior, we've got people who are in the shoreside management side of things, real yacht-focused expertise. And it's very much not a case of, oh, yachting's rubbish. And the reason that I love this sector is because there is such an energy and a passion to do better. And there are so many people. And the reason that CHIRP has been the success that it has been, it's got nothing to do with me. It's because when you talk to people about it, there are so many people like those captains and your friends and chief officers that you mentioned who go, that's a bloody brilliant idea. We definitely need that. We support that.
Yeah.
And so it's a really positive story that we should be telling.
Yeah, totally. Are there any challenges you find in encouraging crew to come forward and make reports? And if so, how do you address those challenges?
I think the first thing is around the rhetoric of it. So that's why I try not to use terms like whistleblowing, terms like reporting, because they have a kind of slightly aggressive note to
I
it.
wouldn't say slightly. I'd say they have a really negative. Yeah, they feel negative.
They do
actually,
feel negative.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I tend to use words more like sharing and learning and those kind of things. Sharing is an inherently positive word, right? And that's I think the point here. This is an inherently positive process. And I think that crew, if they start to, you know, maybe their management company sends one of the CHIRP publications on board, maybe their captain or their chief engineer prints it out and wants to talk about it, maybe they see it on social media somewhere, and they just start to read these reports and they go, actually, this isn't a negative process. This isn't a process where, you know, Johnny, you know, was kind of getting his yacht in trouble and this management company's terrible.
Yeah.
It was just, you know what, this happened to me, no details, fully confidential. And actually, I think we can learn from that. And I think if you are a crew member who goes, oof, that could have been bad. You know, I'm really glad I read that. Maybe I'm going to think differently. Then, you know, a little bit down the line, when something happens to them, be it an accident or be it a near miss or be it a positive thing, they think, well, actually, I learned from that other thing. Maybe that's something that I can share. And actually, maybe other people could learn from that. And if we make it that positive, self-reinforcing kind of cycle. And I do think that, you know, that's right. That's me being very much a kind of isn't the world perfect kind of mentality. But there is also the confidentiality layer there so that people can feel confident that even if they are looking at it themselves in a positive sharing kind of vibe to it, there is actually that layer of very serious confidentiality. And I didn't mention earlier, if you'll allow me to go back, that CHIRP Maritime has been around for 20 years. And there's been thousands of reports in that time. There's not been a single time that the reporter has been identified in that period.
Oh, wow. Okay,
So,
that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's not just they take it seriously.
Yeah.
It's incredibly effective.
Yeah. Based on the feedback that you have had through CHIRP, are there any training areas that crew could look to improve on based on sort of what you see report-wise?
I would say something you actually mentioned earlier on was about your friends you were talking to who kind of swapped role, right? And then that enabled one of them to see something that maybe they were like, oh, maybe that's something that we could do differently because now we've seen it, and that having that conversation. So I would say rather than, I'm not going to sit here and say every boat needs to have this hugely expensive training package of X. I think honestly, the most important thing is to start having safety management related conversations at all levels of the vessel. Safety management, safety kind of, the safety officer, risk assessment, those kind of words tend to be words that most crew refer to as somebody else does that.
Right.
So there's someone else, maybe the captain, maybe somebody shoreside, and not entirely sure who. It's kind of their job, right? It's over there. And I'd like us to start having these conversations at a much broader level. And so in terms of training, the actual CHIRP reports are a fantastic resource for that. And I've had captains and chief officers come around and say to me that they just took one of the reports and they sat down with the deck crew and they just said, there you go. Let's just talk through this. And so is there anything in here? There's 6 reports in here. Let's talk through this. Is there anything in here that speaks to us? And that kind of training is invaluable because that's how we start to have this same safety management conversations. And we can use words like stop work authority, which is people's willingness to shout stop when something's going wrong, because someone always sees it going wrong, right? But are they willing to shout stop?
Yeah.
We talk about reporting, those types of words. But if we're having these conversations in that friendly way, low level, where everybody's engaged, that's incredibly powerful. Yeah. And then the final thing,
also the point of CHIRP, isn't it? That people learn from it, not being sort of horrible, but learn from other people's mistakes.
Exactly.
It's sort of how we all learn, isn't it? Failings.
Absolutely. Well, the director of CHIRP has this lovely expression he loves to use anytime he gets a chance, which is that you don't have enough time to make all the mistakes yourself. And so it's better to learn from other people's mistakes rather than doing them all yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's very much it. And then regarding your friends who swapped position, I just say that's also something that I think we can do more of, is invite in external voices.
Yeah.
And that might be somebody, who comes in a training capacity to have a look at things. It might be somebody who from the management company who comes in and does things. But it might also just be that new crew member who comes on board.
A new set of eyes.
Exactly. And, often nobody likes the guy who comes on board and they've been there for 30 seconds and they're going, well, on my last boat, we did it. On my last boat, we did it. On my last, that can be annoying.
Yeah.
But there's also a space for that as well, where maybe there is some reason why that's a better way. And maybe there is a reason why that person is going, maybe we could think about doing that differently. Yeah. So openness to external voices and bringing that down to the lower level would be my two main things.
And I think when you're doing a job every day, whatever it is, whether it's what I do every day, what you do every day, what, bosun's doing every day, there is a part probably of complacency, not on purpose, but where you are repeating the same chores, the same duties every day. And if someone comes in with a fresh set of eyes, often it can, like you say, is annoying when someone's trying to tell you that what you've been doing is wrong, but actually seeing it from the outside because they're not doing it every day. Because when you're repeating yourself, you just go into the motion of doing it, washing down or, putting the tenders out or whatever it is. So actually sometimes just someone coming from the outside and seeing it from a different angle can be useful.
Can I give you an example of one of my own areas?
Please do, yeah.
So I used to work on a research yacht. Right? We had an ROV, an unmanned submarine. And I was the mate. And we'd always done it in a certain way. Long story short, we would have some wires that we would normally stop people falling over the side. Right. And we would take them down so that we could launch the equipment, and then we'd put them back up afterwards. So for the time that we're launching the equipment, we would all be there, without anything between us and the sea. And we'd wear life jackets and that kind of good stuff, but there was a risk there. And I was very much, that's the way we do it. And we continue doing it that way because that's the way that we decided to do it 5 years ago, and we just continue doing it that way. And I had a safety officer, and on that vessel, and this is, I think, good practice for all yachts, is rather than the chief mate being the safety officer, because the chief mate's job is to make it happen, right?
Yeah.
And then the safety officer's job is to make it happen safely.
Yeah.
And if those are the same person, I think that sometimes can be a little bit difficult. So one thing I always try and encourage yachts to do is, if you've got a big enough yacht with a big enough crew, take one of your second officers and officially make them the safety officer, give them that responsibility. And in this case, my second officer came along to me and said, Paul, why do we take the wires down? And I'm like, because we always take the wires that way. Because we've always done it that way. We've always done it that way. That's the answer, isn't it? And he goes, I don't think we need to. And I'm like, yeah, but we do. We do. We've always done it that way, whatever. And he keeps badgering me about it. And eventually he's completely right. Actually, that this different system, which is different than the one we had when we first started doing it, actually goes over the top of the wires.
Yeah.
We weren't needing to take them down.
Yeah.
But it needed somebody who was willing to say, Paul, why are we doing it like that?
But also he wasn't doing it so closely every day. So they had a totally different perspective.
Exactly, exactly. But you also, and I'm not going to say that I'm like the kind of your safety culture superhero here. I should probably have been like, that's a really good point. We should talk about that, rather than like, no. But eventually he got me to do it. But also you need an environment where that person's willing to say it.
Well, that's a whole different conversation, isn't it?
It is, but it is the conversation.
Yeah.
And safety culture, it's the culture word that's the most important thing. Culture is how we do things, whether that's a culture of excellence, whether it's a culture of safety, whether it's a culture of peak performance in a sports team or whatever. Culture is how we do things.
But I think also culture is a creation of the people on board. Like I could go into my office and say, right, everyone, I'm changing the culture to this today.
Good luck.
And everyone could say, great, but actually it's not going to happen, because the culture is what we do and who we are every day. And if you are on board a vessel where the culture is that you don't approach your, senior officers to mention things you're concerned about, or you can't call things out, it doesn't matter how much you want to, that will never be welcome. So that's down to the senior crew to ensure that the culture is one that allows for that. And that's going back to what I was saying earlier about the positive side of it. That is what I feel now. I hear so much more, because a lot of people that we deal with, like the chief officers and captains that we have close relationships with, the conversations are around having that culture on board. And that is only a positive thing for this, because no one wants to be the spoil sport to say, well, we shouldn't be doing that because it's dangerous. And then 30 other crew are like, well, we've always done it like this, and we want it, and we love this.
Shut
and we
up.
want it. Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, he's such a spoil sport. So having a culture actually where someone feels comfortable to be able to voice their opinion is so essential, not just on board, but in every walk of life.
Every single possible aspect. It's got not just safety, it's every single aspect of a vessel's operations, or a life ashore, right, in running a company. But it's leading by example. And the problem with safety culture is it is an incredibly tedious, thankless task trying to build a culture like that. Because you have to say, Alicia, if you see anything going wrong, please tell me. You have to say that 1,000 times and live it and demonstrate it. And when you do actually come to me and be like, listen, not now.
Exactly.
It's broken. All of those 1,000 times I just asked you.
Yeah, it's fine to say, oh, I'm really open to feedback, but actually you have to be good at taking it. And actually taking feedback is a really difficult thing.
And it's like trust.
Yeah.
And we talk about building trust and how hard that is. Like building trust takes years and breaking trust takes a moment.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Because I can tell you all 100 times. And then if that person actually comes and says, Paul, I've been thinking about this, and you go, yeah, mate, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Then that person's never coming back.
Yeah, exactly.
You're done.
Missed the chance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to build. And I think it's an exciting time. I think this industry is amazing. The crew that I see, the crew that I'm involved with training and hearing from, they're amazing. They're amazing new kind of age people who are deeply passionate about what they do, deeply professional, really serious people who take an active role in wanting to build a better yachting industry. And that's why I think CHIRP has come along at exactly the right time to this wave of these types of people. And we are a tool. CHIRP is a tool for them to use to make things better.
That's interesting, because we have had discussions recently in our office about the difference in the way a lot of the yachts are run with training budgets. So a lot of our vessels, amazingly, have really generous training budgets, because ultimately your example of you've done the same thing with the wires for 5 years, but the technology or the equipment you're using had changed. Obviously, equipment and technology is only as modern to the day that it's released. So 5 years down the line, whatever you were doing, the process was out of date. So interestingly, like a lot of the boats that we work with that have big training budgets, they're constantly, all the crew are developing. So they're up to date with all of the equipment on board, or they're up to date with the changes that are happening in the industry. Fantastic. I wish every boat could have that situation, but unfortunately not. So what's interesting with CHIRP is that you say it's a tool. So if you're a boat that has no training budget or a very small training budget, or the structure of your crew means that you can't have people rotating on and off 3-4 months doing training courses, etc., and you can't have people coming on board. What a great way to actually have those conversations on board by printing off a piece of paper, popping it in your crew mess and saying, Thursday morning when we're having our coffee break, well, I'm going to sit down and we're going to chat through it.
Exactly.
I'm not saying it's a replacement for a training budget at all, but I'm just saying that if you don't have that facility, how great to be able to have these conversations, not just with junior crew, with senior crew as well, you know, because maybe their training was a long time ago, etc. So you're right, it is a tool. So that's my sort of final part of this chat. So I wanted to ask you, if you had one piece of advice for crew on the feedback you get from CHIRP, what would it be and how to sort of approach coming to CHIRP?
Well, I think you probably just said it, to be honest with you. The one dream that I would have of CHIRP is if every captain on every yacht was to kind of, or every chief officer even to say, this is important and exactly right. And if you've got a training budget that you can get DSNM to come on board and do some training with you, amazing, right? Lovely. That's obviously going to be the next level thing.
Yes,
but
sure.
It doesn't cost much to print off a piece of paper and to go down to the crew mess and to say, we're going to have a conversation about this. And so my one takeaway for CHIRP in terms of how we can really radically change safety culture in this industry is to take that bit of paper, have a conversation with that new deckhand, that new stew, that new engineer, and actually say, what can we learn from this thing that happened on that boat over there? Is there anything we can learn? And I guarantee the answer will be, yeah, maybe we could do that differently.
Yeah.
And that is how we then drive that change. And it doesn't need to cost anything.
No, sure. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you so much
Thank you for
for coming to chat with us.